the police, they now have to take out a loan. They got to borrow some money, about $300 million. They're looking for $300 million to resolve a police misconduct issue. It has come to this. Let's go to it. Chicago PD, Chicago Police Department. They are now set to borrow $283.3 million in order to resolve police misconduct lawsuits. The city of Chicago must borrow this money to cover the soaring cost of lawsuits alleging Chicago police officers committed a wide range of misconduct, including wrongful convictions and improper pursuits, as part of the city's 2026 budget, according to the mayor. Mayor Brandon Johnson said. Before we get into the rest of this story, understand the police are defunding the police so much so that they now have a negative debt crisis due to lawsuits. You would have avoided this if you did not have credible claims from citizens who said that this cop, that cop, and this cop are corrupt. And they engaged in civil rights violation. And because of that, you now have to pay that citizen, that resident, and that resident, defunding the police. So now they have to borrow money, according to the mayor. It will likely cost Chicago taxpayers approximately $52 million in interest to borrow that money and pay off that money during the next 5 years. That is according to estimates provided to the Chicago City Council by the Chief Financial Officer, the CFO, Jill Jaworski. Now, Chicago taxpayers have spent at least $285.3 million to resolve lawsuits alleging Chicago police officers committed a wide range of misconduct so far in 2025. That's according to an analysis of city data by WTTW News. That is $200 million more than the city's annual budget to resolve lawsuits alleging police misconduct, city records show. So understand, they already have a preset budget to resolve misconduct issues. That's already taxpayer funding going out the door because of misconduct of police officers. So you have defunding the police. Let's, okay, we're fine with it up to a certain amount. And we're fine with police misconduct. We know it's going to happen up to a certain amount. But the culture is so extreme that they're doubling the amount and having to borrow money in order to keep the agency, the governmental agency known as the police department, running. Can I say this? What other department would have this kind of leeway? Watershed management would never be able to survive if taxpayers had to pay damn near $300 million to cover claims of corruption. Waste management, never. That governmental agency would not survive. If the taxpayers had to pay $300 million in order to keep them afloat, what would happen? A changing of the guard, a changing of the culture, a transition and a transformation of leadership. All of that would take place under any other governmental agency in your city. There's more. 2024. In 2024, taxpayers spent at least $107.5 million to resolve police misconduct lawsuit. That's according to a separate news analysis by WTTW News. 2026. Taxpayers are set to pay an additional $90 million to 180 people who spent a combined nearly 200 years in prison after being wrongfully convicted based on what they allege was fabricated evidence gathered by former Chicago Police Sergeant Ronald Watts, who was convicted in 2013 of taking bribes and other officers. Despite that, the 2026 budget sets aside just $82.5 million to cover the cost of resolving police misconduct lawsuits. You don't have one bad apple. You have a lot of them. And they are right about bad apple. Bad apples spoil the bunch. And so you have a sergeant. This is a person in middle management. He's a middle management guy. Okay. He's close enough to the streets to accept the bribes. He's close enough to leadership to hide it. So he's a middle management guy. Before the middle management guy was, let's just say, uncovered, there was a lot of talk about the middle management guy. There were a lot of complaints about this sergeant, a lot of complaints about the officers taking bribes. A lot of people looked the other way. It was the culture of policing. So now the taxpayers, they have to pay for the misconduct and the mismanagement of these officers. That is the way it will be for your city as well, if you do not get out of control policing under control. Because at the end of the day, the money is what's paid out to the victims of these cops time and time again. So this is what needs to change in Chicago. City officials have to step up to comply with the consent decree. The federal court order designed to compel the department to change the way it trains, the way it supervises, and the way it disciplines officers and for them to stop routinely violating the civil rights of Black and Latino citizens. 6.5 years after the consent decree was implemented, Chicago PD had fully complied with only 22% of its requirements by the end of June. That's according to a court-appointed monitoring team charged with keeping track of reform efforts. You have Jesse Fuentes, alderman, 26th Ward. Fuentes said she hopes this moment serves as a reckoning about both the financial toll and the human cost of police misconduct. Fuentes represents Humboldt Park, home to many people who contend they were framed by disgraced former CPD detective Ronaldo Guevara. Taxpayers have paid $112 million to resolve 9 cases. Naming Guevara, 44 cases are pending, records show. And there are many more. Now, I've said this for many years about Chicago. Chicago PD's main job is keeping North Chicago separate from South Chicago. And the reason why you have such an out of control murder rate and violent crime rate is because the police department, look at the stats, they're not solving crimes. They're not solving homicides. They're not solving violent crimes. Well, why is that? Well, they're taking money. They're going to work in order to solicit bribe, to keep the middle management part alive. You can't tell me that if the police department has a culture of non-corruption, if it has a culture of non-corruption, that means the corrupt actors would not have leadership space to operate in such a manner. But if most are complicit, if not engaged, that means the culture is the other way, where corruption can run free without meaningful reformation to stop it. There's more. These families had to suffer. They had to suffer an immense amount of trauma because of these cops, not just individuals who were behind bars, but their children had to suffer. Their parents had to suffer. Their relatives had to suffer, who are still in the community, according to Fuentes, calling it an injury added to an insult that those residents' tax dollars are being used to defend the very cops and the other officers. Isn't that ironic that we are forced to pay for our own oppression? So we go to work, the taxpayer goes to work, and they are forced to pay for their own oppression. They have no choice. They get brutalized in the front end, brutalized in the back end, brutalized in the middle. Chicago taxpayers have paid at least $42.4 million to defend Officer Guevara and other officers he worked with during his 26-year career. 26-year career. 26-year career. The city agreed to pay $62.5 million to victims of this guy. That's Ronaldo Guevara, men who were wrongfully convicted of violent crimes they never committed, mostly during the 1980s and 1990s. Obviously, he's not the only one. There you have it. So now you have a different review of Chicago. Dear brother, thoughts here?
You know, what kept popping up in my mind when you were describing this story is the 2008 financial crisis. I mean, it's not like A to A analogy, but in that instance, you had a very powerful group of people who inflicted some kind of harm on a powerless group of people. And then it ended up being the powerless group of people that had to bail out the powerful group of people. And I feel
Yeah.
like this is sort of a microcosm of that. The difference and there, I mean, one difference at least is that when it comes to the police force, you're going to end up harming people in ways that are really different than I think
Yep.
the financial impact of the 2008 crisis. So I hope this all gets, shined the brightest light on, because at this point, this is something that is systemic. I also think it is something that repeats itself across various like levels in our culture, and it's going to continue to happen, just as with the 2008 crisis. After that happened, they went on to do whatever they wanted, and we're now, as some say, on the precipice of some other crash because of the way they have again mishandled their finances. And I'm not trying to reduce what's going on here to that, but I think it's important for people to remember that this is a theme that is recurring in our culture more and more.
That's right, because corruption, governmental corruption, always equates to financial mismanagement, regardless of what that corruption
Yeah.
may be, right? So you're going to get the expression of financial chaos based on the mismanagement, even if that mismanagement comes by way of corruption. And so that's what you're seeing, and that's a similarity that exists in both realms. We're going to bring you updates as they come. I'm sure there will be more to talk about during the defense of these cops in Chicago.